So I'm going to officially say a big warm welcome to all of you this evening. Thank you for being here. Thank you for booking onto this As Live tour of Manchester. And again, apologies for those of you who were nice and early. I did try to get on early, but yeah, Zoom update really messed me around. So not to worry. What I hope is that everything else works smoothly for us and we can enjoy the tour as normal. And this is one of two As Live tours in Manchester that I have. I did one of them a couple of weeks ago, and so this one, and then you get between the two, you get kind of to see most of the important places of interest around the city centre. So hello, Donna, just joining us. Let me share all that stuff. That all looks fairly standard to what I'm used to. Oh, that all looks good. Oh, we might be cooking on gas here, look. So I hope, let me know, where do I put my chat? Over here somewhere. And I hope you can all see that okay. And so I'm going to start that, and I hope everybody can see it okay. So we're starting our walk around Manchester here, outside this beautiful building, which, you know, it kind of looks like a church, doesn't it? But it's not a church, it is actually a library. So very much I guess you could say, a temple of learning, a temple of education and literature. It's a library that was built in 1899 in memory of a very wealthy Manchester businessman who had a lifelong love of books and learning. And it was built as a memorial to him by his wife. His name was John Ryland, which is why it's called the John Rylands Library. And his wife who built it was actually his third wife, and her name was Enriqueta. And Enriqueta was actually born in Cuba, although she did have English parents, but they gave her this rather Latin name, Enriqueta. And originally she lived with the family as a companion to his second wife. But when his second wife passed away, Enriqueta soon became wife number 3. There was a 42-year age difference between them. And of course, one might have been tempted to ask what it was about this 42 years older man, one of the wealthiest men in Manchester at that time, that it was that attracted her to him. But they had a very, a very good relationship, hence why she used some of the vast wealth that she inherited when he died to build this library, or have it built as a memorial to him. He was one of the wealthiest people in Manchester at that time. His wealth that Enriqueta inherited was the equivalent of about 300 million in today's money. So yeah, sparkling wit and personality was obviously the thing that drew her to him. The 300 million would have just been a bonus, I suppose. The library itself, she insisted on the finest materials. The stone is Cumbrian stone, which she felt was the finest in England. All of the wood, the oak paneling and beams inside it are Polish oak. And all of the glass, the stained glass, the decorative glass within there is German. So she was really choosing what she felt was the best kind of materials to pay tribute to John Ryland. Not only was the building the finest, the collection too, because they have an incredible collection of historic manuscripts and books, including one of the original Bibles printed by Gutenberg on the very first press ever made in the world. Only 15 of those left. And they also have one of the very oldest fragments of the New Testament of the Bible, a 2nd century fragment. think it's from the Gospel of John, if I recall correctly. And so we have the, and it is an incredible. It has beautiful decoration throughout, and really is just you know, outside and in, you can really appreciate the quality of the decor. And it was opened to the public, and it still is today. It's not a library where you can take items away so much, but it is a library where people can go and study and access the historic collections. And the photograph outside here does give you an idea. This is one of the main reading rooms, and all of those on each of the sides there, they all lead into little alcoves with the beautiful bookshelves. So it is well worth a visit if you ever are in Manchester. And it's a very distinctive historic building in a very modern area of this city. Manchester, like most of our large cities these days, is quite a contrast between old and new. So, you know, the John Rylands Library is kind of a right at the end of the Victorian age, but built in this Gothic style. But it's adjacent to some of the modern developments of Manchester in an area of the city called Spinningfields. And Spinningfields, the name itself is a throwback to what was previously Manchester's most famous and important trade, which was the spinning and production of cotton. Manchester was known as Cottonopolis because it was a global centre for the cotton industry. Now, here in this square is a very interesting little bar. It's called Australasia. And where do you have to go to get into the bar called Australasia? Well, you go downstairs inside there. You go down under, literally. It's a basement bar just here in this nice little square. And where once a lot of the textile industry would have been based, it's been redeveloped in recent decades. So now, you know, thousands of people are still working here every day, but they are working in financial services, in banking, in law, these kinds of businesses, in tech industries, rather than in the textile factories of previous times. So the Spinningfields district still very important for the Manchester economy. When you got the Men at Work song, well, I didn't even think of that. I don't know whether I should apologise. Your brain has created that one there. I just said the words. So just to, you know, to think a little bit about this city of Manchester. It's the third largest city in England. It has a population of over 600,000. And in the Greater Manchester area, which is a huge kind of urban region made up of Manchester itself and lots of other surrounding towns, the population of Greater Manchester is around over about 3.2 million. And as well as its importance as a former industrial centre, particularly for the textile industries, Manchester is known as being a city of radical ideas, radical people, creative people, has a great history in music, and it has a very important history in terms of social change and in terms of radical, particularly left-wing politics as well. And that's something that a reputation that the city has had for many years and is still true today. I think this sort of left-leaning political stance is something I always tell people when we come to Manchester. In fact, I was there a week ago today with a group from Vienna, and I was telling them about this. And I said to them, the idea of there ever being a conservative mayor of Manchester would just be kind of a laughable, unthinkable thing. And sure enough, the following day, we had the mayoral elections, and Greater Manchester Regional Mayor Andy Burnham, he was re-elected. He got 470,000 votes, I think, for the Labour Party, so the left-leaning. Um, the next highest candidate got just under 50,000 votes. So, that kind of bears out exactly what I was telling them. So here in the square, we've got a little sort of open air bar that opened up, and it's the first place today that we've seen the special symbol, which is the symbol of the bee. And the bee is the symbol of the city of Manchester. It represents the fact that bees work together in large communities to achieve things by collaboration and collective effort. And of course, they're known for being very industrious. And that's kind of a reflection of the way that this city actually grew up. It grew up because people were working together in large numbers here to produce things, and being one of the first major industrial centres, really. The bee symbol has become even more prevalent in recent years. And that's particularly because of the terrorist attack in 2017 at the arena in Manchester, just after the concert by the US singer Ariana Grande, where somebody committed a suicide bombing attack just in the reception area of the arena, as families and a lot of young people, parents with kids, were leaving that concert. 22 people were killed, hundreds injured, and it was a real time when the people of Manchester came together and celebrated what was great about their city and their feeling of togetherness. And the bee symbol was just everywhere, even more than it ever had been in the past, as the city's symbol. There was like a kind of an agreement made that any tattoo artists in Manchester, they were offering bee tattoos for free to anyone who wanted them, because it was a way of showing their solidarity and their spirit. And looking on, well, not bees, but turtles. Interesting mural advertising. I can't believe that the Mutant Ninja Turtles are still around. They seem so, you really felt there was something that was going to be around for a couple of years in the 90s, but no, here they still are generations later. Just that wasn't me adjusting my gimbal. That was me putting my turtle mask on. No. It was Titian, the fifth Ninja Turtle. So this is the outdoor bar area here with the mock Oast House place where the raw materials for the beer making are dried out. A familiar sight, particularly down in Kent. Now, most of this area is very modern buildings. This is kind of the one exception. This is several decades older, and this is one of the main criminal courts in Manchester. And there have been some quite high-profile trials over the years. Just last year, the trial of Lucy Letby, who was a nurse, if you don't know, if you're not from the UK, convicted of murdering and attempting to murder babies who were in her care in the neonatal unit. But another of the very prominent trials that took place here was the conviction of computer pioneer, World War II code breaker, and all-round genius Alan Turing, who was convicted here of charges of homosexuality in the 50s, and he was sentenced to what was called chemical castration. What that meant was that he was given certain injections that would basically destroy his sexual urges, and would mean that he would no longer be able to engage in any kind of sexual activity homosexual or otherwise. It was a really horrible thing. And, Alan Turing is one of the well-known people that suffered this, but, he was one of thousands of people who were criminalized for being part of the LGBT community. And he and many others were given pardons, royal pardons, decades later, really too late, of course, many years after they were dead. And in Turing's case, he took his own life. So it's a really terrible kind of episode in our country's history. And Alan Turing is just one example of the really great minds and thinkers. We think of Manchester's radical politics, it having a sort of a role in the music and cultural scene. And even going back, we think of its role in the development of industry. But academic Manchester is also important. Turing and others were involved in the development of some of the earliest computers here at the university. And the very first stored program computer, the basis for what we are all sitting here using right now, that was done in Manchester. As was the splitting of the atom, the development of atomic theory, many other scientific advances. So it's a place of great and radical thinkers, as well as great and radical political ideas and cultural ideas. Susan, Professor Brian Cox, of course, one of our most kind of famous scientists and science communicators these days. And we can see, picking up on that bee theme again, that's something that Manchester certainly is around the city centre. Perhaps not in this area after the working day's finished, but Manchester is definitely buzzing. I think it's fair to say that that's true. And, there are things you expect to find in certain places and not others. And one of the things you might expect to find in a little village, perhaps in an old phone box, is a little book exchange. You don't expect to find them in the middle of a big city, but here we are, right here in Spinningfields. Let me get Secret Life of Cows. Oh, that looks interesting. The Librarian. Yeah, I just love that. The little library in Spinningfields. And yeah, it really is something you wouldn't really think that you're going to find in this kind of area. I agree, Tom, you should have those everywhere, but I mean, you tend to get them quite a bit in smaller communities, but not in the city centre. But it's nice to see, and nice to see that it's in such great shape. It means that people are using it, not vandalising it, or just leaving inappropriate things in there, as you could imagine possibly happening. So the modern building just in front of us is one of the sort of bigger of the office buildings here, 20 stories high, and has a rooftop restaurant and garden area. But there are, numerous office buildings in this part of town, and it's a place where a lot of people come to work. Yeah, 20 stories. That's the name of the restaurant and bar on the roof of this building, which, as I said, that's how high it is. Of course, Manchester known for many things, and one of them is sport, particularly football. It is a big passion of many people in the city, and it is home to two of England's biggest and most successful teams, Manchester United, Manchester City. And the city is very divided. Are you a red supporting Manchester United? Are you a blue supporting Manchester City? The really dedicated fans, they won't really mention the name of the other team. They just call them maybe that lot or that other lot. And they probably, wouldn't wear something in the colour of the rival club. So people do take it very, very seriously. and both playing in big stadiums, but not in the city centre. Of course, they're both in locations with a bit more space on the edge of town. Now, going back into the history of Manchester, it was, it was a place of industry, but it was also a place where there was a lot of social deprivation. The Industrial Revolution, of course, brought many far-reaching changes to society, particularly the change from the majority of people living in rural areas to people living in cities. But it also, within the cities, brought whole new social problems. You had huge discrepancies between rich and poor, the people owning the factories and the people scraping a living, working in them, where you had pretty terrible working conditions, unsafe working conditions, no health provision, no sick pay, no job security. There's a nice thing to see on a post box. Love letters only. Let's encourage people to be nice to each other. And they're very much not what they always were in the 19th century. And we can see that this is the kind of street where not the super rich, but definitely some of the people who were prosperous in 19th century Manchester would have been living in these early 19th century terraced houses. Most of them are now office buildings, but one of them was sold a few years ago for an apartment in one of these buildings was sold for well over £1 million. Just a small apartment. Very wealthy person from the region wanted to have a little place where he or his wife could stay in the city if they'd been for a night out in Manchester. So it was basically just a little crash pad for them in the centre of town. 1.3 million, let's have 2 or 3, why not? So these discrepancies between rich and poor were something that had a big impact on one man in particular who came here in the 19th century. He grew up in Germany. He grew up actually in the city in Germany where I used to live, a place called Wuppertal, where his father was a businessman, a factory owner. And the young man in question had started to have some quite radical political views about equality and improving the rights of working people. And his father thought this was absolutely terrible. And he wanted to try and get his son past this sort of youthful dalliance with left-wing politics. And he thought, I know what I'll do. I'll send him to help manage the Manchester branch of our business. That'll sort him out. It'll give him something to focus on. It'll bring him back into the fold. Unfortunately, it didn't work out quite that way. The young man was called Friedrich Engels. And when he came to Manchester, what he discovered was even more of a city with these huge differences between rich and poor, and where the plight of the working classes and the aspirations of the working classes was something that he felt even more needed to be addressed and needed to be listened to. And so rather than sort of his father wanting to cure him of these scandalous egalitarian and liberal ideas, they actually reinforced them. And while he was here, he started to really academically study these things. And he had a very important meeting whilst here, in the sense that somebody else from Germany was in Manchester, and they would meet together in one of the libraries, not the John Rylands Library, one of the other historic libraries of Manchester. And Marx and Engels, so Karl Marx was here as well. And it was in Manchester where they first started researching, working together, discussing ideas. So Manchester in many, many ways can be seen as the birthplace of socialism and communism as we think of them today. So, in terms of its reputation for radical political views, I don't think you're really coming in with some heavyweight hitters there. It's doesn't come uh, much more radical than Marx and Engels starting to compose what became the Communist Manifesto in one of the city's libraries. Now, a complex of buildings across the Meuse is another sort of former industrial complex that has now been modernized. Former warehouses and rail interchanges for freight trains. You had canal junctions, railway junctions, and huge warehousing facilities. London and the continent, north and west, south and west. You know, these were huge railway warehouses for the storage of goods, and they were coming here from all over the world. They were coming into the port of Liverpool, and then they were coming initially along the River Irwell from the Mersey, but then the building of the Manchester Ship Canal enabled much larger vessels to come to Manchester, bringing the goods here and taking them in the other way as well. Oh, very energetic people going for an after work run. Look at that. We won't join them. Let's keep on strolling. Much better. So look all the way down this street. This is all railway buildings or former railway buildings. Absolutely incredible that these were. You had the freight trains coming in here and the warehouses and all of those things right in the heart of the city from in the late 19th century, and this beautiful railway architecture. I think really, some of our finest architecture of the 19th century, I think, is really the railway architecture and some of the industrial buildings, because they were not just functional, they were built to be somewhere that would show off the wealth and prosperity that they were bringing. Don't you use more energy walking than running? I'm not sure you do at the speed I walk. Although that may be true, that maybe the speed I would run would also be sort of in the same ratio. So, Elizabeth, we've got some beautiful buildings across the street, but I just love this. One of the things that Manchester has really developed a reputation for over many, many years is its tolerance. Whoever you are loved. Love yourself, love Manchester, love MCR. That's the abbreviation for Manchester. And the encouragement of people of diverse backgrounds is something that the city is known for. It goes along with its liberal politics over many years, and the fact that people came here from many different places to work, and everybody kind of lived in this big community together. It was one of the earliest places to have an open LGBT community, one of the very first cities to ever institute a Pride festival. And the so-called gay village is still one of the really bustling and fun parts of Manchester city centre to this day. The Manchester Pride Festival, one of the biggest in the country, and takes place quite late in the year. Takes place in August usually, but these lovely murals here, all to do with love and flowers and those kind of things in this modernized industrial setting. The Pride festivals, Pride month comes earlier in the summer, but the Pride festivals, certainly in the UK, tend to be spaced out along through the summer, so that you don't have cities kind of competing, because people who like to go to different Pride festivals get the chance then to go to various different ones. So beautiful Victorian commercial buildings along this street. And here we see again, even the bollards, the bins, the advertising spaces, they're using this B symbol of the city. Oh, got a rubbish truck turning around with that. But we've got another lovely building actually on the left-hand side here, which is called the Albert Hall. Not the Royal Albert Hall, like in London. This was the Albert Hall, that was originally a religious building, was the home of Manchester's Methodist community. And the Methodist community was very, very strong in all of the big working cities of England. The anti-establishment and social consciousness aspects of Methodism really struck a chord with working people. And so in cities like Birmingham and in Manchester and in the East End of London, you did have these really big Methodist bases, and this was one of them. They do say that it's one of the most haunted buildings in Manchester. That's because Methodism, as you may know, was traditionally a teetotal religious movement, and it was later converted into an entertainment venue with pubs and bars and things like that. And so they say that all of Manchester's former Methodists, teetotalers to a man, were very much restless about what had been done to their former meeting hall. Margaret, your brother was ordained as a minister in the Albert Hall in the Methodist Church. How fantastic. You see another side of these huge railway complexes that have now been converted into modern usage. Oh, when was that, Margaret, if you don't mind me asking? And I mean, it was still, it was still held by the Methodists until relatively recently. It is a beautiful building, though, several decades ago, but still, it shows us that, it's only relatively recently that it has changed its uses. Dawn, I agree. I love it when they keep the old signs on buildings. I mean, not only does it give just extra character to the place and gives you a little bit of information, it's very useful for people like me who don't need to try to work out what the place used to be. like when they put the date that it was built on the front of buildings, and if people don't spot it, they think, oh, he's done really well to remember all these construction dates of all these buildings. People enjoying a nice pizza. Rudy's there. It was voted one of the best pizza places in England, I think, a couple of years ago. But we're on a street with some very, very iconic buildings, very important buildings, and not least the one with the arches that we can see on the opposite side of the road now that we've crossed over. It's such a big building, you can't get it all on the screen. These days it's a hotel, but it was originally built, and it was as the Manchester Free Trade Hall. And the Manchester Free Trade Hall was a place for political meetings. It was a place for large gatherings. It was a place for entertainments and huge festivals. And the Manchester Free Trade Hall, in its political meeting stage, it was notable for one particular time when Winston Churchill, much earlier in his career, before he was ever Prime Minister, he was giving a speech there, and it was interrupted and he had to be sort of escorted off out of the building because it was interrupted by women protesting about getting the vote. Suffragettes interrupted Churchill's speech there. It's also played an interesting role in modern music in two ways. Very famously in the 1960s, Bob Dylan was playing a concert at the Free Trade Hall, and it was the notorious night when Bob, midway through the show, switched from acoustic guitar to electric, which many of his long-standing fans saw as a betrayal of his roots. In fact, famously, members of the crowd were shouting "Judas" and "Sell out" and all of these things at him. So it was the famous concert where Dylan went electric. And in the 70s, it was played host to a very iconic concert by the Sex Pistols, the British punk band. Now, this is an iconic gig because, not just because of the actual concert, it was because of the number of people who subsequently claimed to have been there. Those who definitely were there claimed that there were only about 40 in the audience. But because the Sex Pistols later went on to become such an iconic part of the punk movement in the UK, everybody wanted to claim that they had been there right at the beginning at this iconic Free Trade Hall concert. But actually, there were only a handful of people there. It would have needed to be in one of the football stadiums if all of the people who claimed to have been there actually had been. One of the people we know was there was the founder of Factory Records. And Tony Wilson was his name. And Factory Records became an iconic part of Manchester's modern musical history. With some of the leading independent bands of the 80s and 90s going through Factory Records. And he was a key part of the music scene, also owning the iconic Hacienda nightclub in the city. So the Free Trade Hall, has a big place in Manchester's musical history. Some of the great, more modern bands were people like Joy Division, the Smiths. Members of both of those bands were at that Sex Pistols Free Trade gig that night. But in later times, bands like Oasis, Happy Mondays, or huge Manchester bands, Stone Roses, and Manchester was very much part of the indie rock music scene in the UK in the 80s, 90s. When I was a teenager, a lot of the music that I was listening to and that friends were into was coming out of Manchester. And the Free Trade Hall was obviously one of the big venues for that. And really lovely that they've maintained it in such a fantastic state of preservation to convert it into a hotel these days. I'm going to move along the street a bit, aren't I? And we're going to take a look at another of the cities. You really get some of the great, you see the beautiful Victorian architecture and the different styles of architecture that were being used. The Victorians were, there's not really a Victorian style of architecture. The Victorians just loved bringing back styles from previous eras, whether that was the Gothic or the classical, as we see in the building opposite here, or the Renaissance. The Free Trade Hall is a little bit of a kind of a Renaissance style building. Susan, classical music as well at the Free Trade Hall. Yeah, absolutely. Broadcast on the BBC. It was just a really, important music and entertainment venue for many, many decades. But over the road beyond the traffic lights is this incredible red brick building, which I think is one of the most spectacular buildings in the city. It is called the Midland Hotel. And like many of the great hotels of the late 19th and very early 20th centuries, it was built by a railway company, the Midland Railway Company. And one of the main railway stations of Manchester used to be just behind it. And the Midland Railway Hotel was built as one of the finest hotels in the city, and it remains to this day one of the most iconic and sort of famous and popular hotels in the city. Absolutely beautiful building. And it's played host to many, many famous guests over the years, including Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. Whenever she was in Manchester, if she had an overnight stay, this is where she would stay. And pretty much all of our prime ministers since it was built in 1905, certainly up until Boris Johnson, all of the UK prime ministers stayed there. Liz Truss wasn't prime minister for long enough. 43 days wasn't long enough for her to make it as far as Manchester. And I don't know whether Rishi Sunak stayed there. I mean, it's a lovely hotel, but it might not be quite upmarket enough for Rishi. Two men who did meet here, though, they were the men whose company made this beautiful thing. Mr. Rolls and Mr. Royce had their first business meeting in the Midland Hotel, and their partnership went on to be supremely successful, making some of the world's most famous luxury motor cars, and also, of course, hugely important in the aeronautical engineering with the aeroplane engines that they make, including some of the most iconic planes of the British military history, including the Spitfire with the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine. So another group of people who actually stayed here were the Beatles. But the Beatles discovered that no matter how famous you are, you have to obey the rules. When the Beatles stayed there, they were not allowed into the restaurant of the hotel, because at the time it still had a dress code, and they were not adhering to it. So they were not allowed in, no matter how famous they were. And I don't think I'm adhering to the dress code either, in shorts. So we'll just go into the reception area and have a look. Unusual to be actually allowed to look inside these buildings. Normally they don't even like you filming anywhere near them, but this just shows us kind of it's very bit of a Art Deco feel, definitely, to the interior here in the lobby area. But just shows us that still is a really lovely hotel to this day. Full livery, peaked cap, of course. So I won't outstay my welcome filming these people as they have a nice drink, which it's probably cost them an awful lot of money. But it is a lovely reception area, isn't it? So let's head back outside and continue on our way. There was one man in particular who liked this building. He's not a man that we are ever particularly happy to be talking about, but he, an important figure in history. But I'll tell you a bit more about him in a moment. As before that, I'm going to actually take a look across the road, because this fantastic circular building across the road is Manchester's Central Library. It's not as old as it looks. It was built in 1934, and it was modelled on the Pantheon in Rome. The interior was completely remodelled a few years ago, very modern inside, but it retains this lovely kind of classical look to it. If you've ever been to the Pantheon in Rome or seen pictures of it, you might know that the Pantheon in Rome has a hole at the top of it, the domed roof, which is great because it lets the sunlight in and really gives beautiful effect to the interior. Obviously, that's okay in Rome. Manchester is famous for its rainy weather. So you do not want to have a hole in the roof of your building, especially not a building that's containing books. It would just be full of soggy books, essentially. So it does have a hole, but it does have a glass covering over it. So it gives its full tribute to the Pantheon, but it also gives full respect to the local climate, which I feel is a very sensible thing to do. Now we know we went into the main entrance of the Midland Hotel, but here on the side is a beautiful side entrance, fantastic doorway, and we've not had a great doorway yet. Susan, it rained when you were in Rome. Oh no. I went to Rome for a week in December once, and the weather was lovely. I've been in the summer as well. It was much hotter then. It was unlucky if it rained. But beautiful carved side doorway on this, and you've got the facade is stone, it's brick, it's these beautiful tiles and just absolutely exquisite materials and carving. But I love this side entrance to the spa, and I think to hairdressers in the basement as well. Isn't that fantastic? Just incredible. And this was built, I don't know if I mentioned the date it was built. It was built in 1905 anyway. So it's 119 years old now. But what a lovely building it is. And yeah, as I said, there was one man in particular who appreciated this building. I don't think he ever saw it in person, but he'd certainly seen pictures of it and film of it. And that was a certain chap by the name of Adolf Hitler. And Hitler, according to documents that were uncovered decades after the Second World War in the archives, Hitler had given instructions that this area of Manchester was to be, if possible, to be left unbombed. The city suffered pretty heavy bombing, like most of the industrial cities in England. But this particular area, even though there was a railway station there and some major transportation links, infrastructure, because his intention was if, or as he saw it, when the Nazis had occupied Britain, he wanted the Midland Hotel Manchester to be his kind of residence in the northwest of the country. So it's kind of not necessarily a link that the hotel would want to celebrate, but on the other hand, the fact that Hitler liked it may well be a reason why it is still here in such an incredible state of preservation. It's not very often you feel like you need to thank Hitler for anything, but maybe this is one of those very, very rare occasions. It is in all its glory. And this is the side of it where people would come actually from the railway, because the big building off to our right, big semicircular building, you can see this used to be a railway terminal. For many years now, it has been a conference and exhibition centre. It was called the GMEX Centre for many years, and now it is known as Manchester Central, which is actually a throwback to the name of the railway station that was here. So no longer a railway station. The main stations in Manchester now, the biggest is Manchester Piccadilly, and the others are Manchester Victoria, Manchester Oxford Road. But this building still very much in use in the former railway building. Now we are in a part of town that is called St. Peter's Fields, and in 1819, it was the site of a notorious and very dark day in Manchester's history, and also one that again ties into this history of radical politics and protest and grassroots political action. In August of 1819, a big rally was held, a peaceful protest. People came from all over the region with their families. Thousands and thousands of people came from all over the area to protest about some of the laws that were in place in Britain at that time, called the Corn Laws. And the Corn Laws were artificially pushing up the prices of very basic goods like grain, making food very expensive. And some working people were really facing the potential of starvation under some of the laws that were in place at that time. But it was intended to be a peaceful demonstration. Chap by the name of Harry Hunt was a speaker who was due to give the main speech at the demonstration. But the authorities in Manchester were not keen for any of this to happen. They were scared that this protest might turn violent. It could turn into some kind of uprising against the authorities, and it could just be get out of control. And they decided they wanted to try to stop that from happening. This was a time, the early 19th century, when the American Revolution, the French Revolution, they were all still pretty fresh in people's minds. And there was a big fear among the establishment in Britain that if you allowed protests by everyday people to go unchecked, and you allowed them to become more politically engaged, politically active, that you were risking a similar kind of progression of events happening here. And so they decided they needed to break up this demonstration and arrest the speaker, Harry Hunt. Now, what they did was very much a case of excessive use of the resources available to them. Of course, this is in the days before proper police force. So what they did was to send in the troops. They sent in mounted troops on horseback who charged into the crowd with swords, slashing left and right, trampling people, cutting them down, almost as though they were still fighting Napoleon's troops at the Battle of Waterloo 4 years earlier. 18 people were killed, and between 400 and 500 seriously injured by the troops on that day. The first person to be killed was a baby aged just 4 months, trampled by one of the military horses. So absolutely horrific incident, dark day in the history of British democracy and of Manchester itself. And because of this it was troops who looked like they were fighting the Battle of Waterloo in St. Peter's Fields. The local newspapers called it the Peterloo Massacre. And Claire, you played the Peterloo Overture by Malcolm Arnold, a piece dedicated to this. And the steps in front of us, they were cleaning them on the day I filmed this, and they've been. This was sort of approximately where Harry Hunt was due to give his speech, on a podium of some kind, and they've made it into a podium where someone can, once they've taken the barriers down after cleaning and restoring it, someone could get up there on the modern thing and talk if they wanted to. And listed on there are details of people who were killed, but also representations of different places in the region that people came from to participate in this actual protest back then in 1819. And it would be a number of years before industrial cities, the newly industrialized cities like Manchester, like Birmingham, like Sheffield, that these places like Liverpool would get political representation. In 1819, they had no members of parliament, they had no representation in the political life. It's only come the 1830s and the Great Reform Acts that those things were done. And we can see Burnley, Lancaster, Bury, Hopwood, just the surrounding towns where people came from and the names of people who lost their lives as well. The Peterloo Massacre. Now, the newspaper that was primarily responsible for criticizing the authorities and actually was the one that first came up with this name was a very famous newspaper that's still around today. It began life in Manchester. It was called the Manchester Guardian. These days, it's a national newspaper based in London. It's just called The Guardian. And The Guardian, you know, is renowned as one of the most important left-leaning newspapers that we have. And that very much reflects its roots in this great socialist city of Manchester and its roots in campaigning for the rights of Manchester's workers and reporting on the abuses and the sort of exploitation that was going on in the industry here. So again, we're walking up the side of this beautiful Midland Hotel, and we've got the modern trams there. Public transport in Manchester, pretty good. They have a modern tram network. They have a good system of local buses, and one of the great things they have is a couple of bus routes that run kind of in a loop, covering different places within the centre of the city, and you can jump on them free of charge and travel around. They have these free bus services to get you from one bit of the city centre to another, which is absolutely fantastic piece of infrastructure. I certainly wish we had something like that here in Birmingham. Would be great. There used to be one in Nottingham, I think, when we were kids. There used to be a free bus service that kind of looped constantly around the city centre, but long gone. But here in Manchester, they still do have that. And we're making our way up towards St. Peter's Square. So this whole area is known as St. Peter's, and St. Peter's Square is actually where the Midland Hotel faces out onto it. The main library that we saw faces onto it, and the huge building we can see kind of in front of us to the left behind the trees. That's what's known as the Town Hall Annex. The Town Hall of Manchester is a huge and beautiful building, but it is currently undergoing a multi-year renovation and is completely covered in white hoardings. It's a massive construction site. They say that it's the biggest current scaffold construction project in the whole of Europe. So there really is, apart from the very tip of its tower, there's not much you can see of it at all. But of course, the work of the local authority is still going on, and that Town Hall Annex office building facing out here onto St. Peter's Square is where a lot of the work of the Manchester City Council is actually being done. So here on St. Peter's Square is where we're going to take a look at our last radical figure in our walk around this this radical and creative city. And it's a figure who fought for many decades for something that should never be taken for granted, because there are people in other parts of the world who are still having to fight for it today, and that is votes for women. And here we have a fantastic sculpture of Emmeline Pankhurst. And Emmeline Pankhurst was probably the most famous of the British suffragettes, certainly one of the leading figures in the female suffrage movement. And I love the fact that the way she's depicted here, not in a heroic pose as we would think of it, but in a pose as she might have been seen, standing on a chair, making a speech, calling on people to fight for these rights, and calling on the establishment, the government, to give concessions. And on the stonework behind her, one of the things that's written is deeds, not action. Sorry, deeds, not words. Deeds, not action. Deeds and action are the same. Deeds, not words. And what she's talking about there was one of the things that she was always saying. And it had two meanings. The one meaning was that she was calling on politicians to take action, not just to discuss the idea of giving women the vote. But the other thing it's doing is telling her suffragettes within the movement, don't just talk about wanting your rights, take action to try to get them, take direct action. And that's very much what they did. They set fire to government property, they chained themselves to things, they fought very, very hard and were terribly treated by the authorities. The suffragettes were arrested, taken into custody. They were treated pretty badly, and many of them then decided that they would go on hunger strike, at which point they were brutally force-fed. If they went on hunger strike and their health was in danger, they would be released. And then as soon as they were well again, they'd be arrested again. It was known as the cat and mouse things that were going on then. To the Cat and Mouse Act enabled them to release them and then rearrest them. But Emmeline Pankhurst was born in Manchester in 1858 and she died in 1828. And unfortunately, full equality for women in terms of voting rights was only achieved 2 weeks after her death. Now, during World War I was a major catalyst in changing the position of women in society, because when all of the men, or a lot of the men, were off fighting in the trenches, the women had to pick up the slack in the factories, running the infrastructure, doing all of those things. And through doing that, they proved that they could do jobs at least as well, in many cases better than men. And so many of the arguments about women being less capable than men were just blown out of the water by the events during those years. And Emmeline Pankhurst made a deal with the British government. She said, okay, we will stop our actions and make sure we do our bit for the war effort, on the condition that when the war is over, this political change is 100% put on at the front of the agenda. And the government accepted that. And strangely enough, the government actually did follow through on it. Just after the war had ended, we had the first female suffrage. It was not full voting equality. Initially, women had to be 30 to vote. And they had to either be married or hold property in their own right. Any men over 21 could vote at that time. And so it was a start. But full equality was not gained until after Emmeline Pankhurst's death, which is a really sad thing of the whole history. But I do love this sculpture of Emmeline Pankhurst. I love the way she still seems to be kind of addressing anyone who's walking past in the center of the city today. Anyone who's strolling through St. Peter's Square, going to work, going out for a meal, getting off a tram. She's almost saying to them, remember what we fought for. Remember how important it is to fight for equality and to fight for voting rights for everyone. And I think it's I think the way she's portrayed here is really fantastic, and it's something that seems so Manchester to me. It just it seems to kind of really be something that very much in line with the spirit of this city, where people have always been creative, where they've always worked hard, and like that bee symbol of the city, it's always been about a city where the focus has been put onto ordinary people and the things that they can achieve, and the way that society needs to develop to enable them to do what they need to do. And that's why, we think of Manchester really as a radical city, as well as a city of culture, of music, of football, of industry, of all of those other things that make it up. So this is where we are going to end, and I'm going to stop my screen sharing, and I'm going to put myself back onto the screen for a little while, and say that I hope you've enjoyed this little stroll around Manchester and covering some of those topics, and a lovely way to spend an evening, I hope, for all of you. And it is a city I always enjoy visiting, Manchester. It's a city I always like going to, and I was delighted to be there last week doing a lovely walking tour for my Austrian group. So what have we got coming up? Well, Beatrice has just put a link in the chat to the Padlet page. It's a little bit sparse at the moment because I need to put some more tours up. Susan, I'd love to go back up to Manchester and do some more tours. I'd like to do a tour around some of the other sort of parts of the city centre. We've kind of covered the grander buildings of the city centre, but there's some really interesting parts of the city, the gay village, the northern quarter, really interesting parts of the city as well that I'd like to go and share with you as well. So the Padlet page has all of my upcoming tours and talks across different platforms. The Buy Me a Coffee link that Beatrice has put on there takes you directly to the shop where you can book future tours. And I will be putting some more tours up in the next couple of days. The Ko-fi link going up there as well, which is where you can book them as well. And on Saturday, I have a live stream tour. That's one of our community funded tours. And I'm going to be going for the first, well, it's not the first, for the first time to do a live tour in Lincoln. I have been to Lincoln on numerous occasions before, but for the first time, I'm going to be doing a live tour there. I'm looking forward to that very much. The weather forecast is really good. Pete, you've just come back from a weekend. Oh, well, you can do the tour then. That's okay. Thank you for volunteering. Looking forward to that very much. It's going to be a rare one because I'm going to be walking uphill. Oh, normally I let gravity do the work, but some of the highlights are at the top of the hill and I want to finish with those. So that's what we're going to do. So I might need to, you might need to bear with me if I get a bit out of breath. Might need to take a little minute. It is called Steep Hill, Pete, and it is very well named. In fact, they're almost underselling it with that name. So Beatrice has just also put a link up to the wish list, and the wish list on Buy Me a Coffee is where you can find the funds for our community funded tours. As you know, when we get to the target figure, I schedule them, and anybody can watch those live without paying a penny, regardless of whether they were able to contribute or not. I've got one up for the moment at the moment to do a small town. We've got lots of quirky small towns, market towns that I can share with you. So we're going to do one of them, and we've got a Cotswolds one up as well. And the next Cotswolds one I'm planning to do, when that is fully funded, is a brand new place in the Cotswolds where we've not done before. I'm also going to be adding a new community funded tour pot in the next couple of days, which will be a rerun of one of my, I think, my most popular ever live stream tour, and that is the boat trip on the Avon in Stratford. It'll be a bit of a higher value fund because we need to include the cost of hiring the boat in that, but hopefully you can contribute to that and we can have another great boat trip. I've asked my father-in-law tonight if he's happy to drive the boat again, and he said, yeah, no problem at all. So we're going to have Captain Ron again on the tour, and So that's going to go up on that wish list page in the next couple of days. So I think I don't have much else to tell you. I hope to see some of you on Saturday. The next As Live tour that I'm going to put up is going to be the final one that I filmed on my recent trips to Germany. We are going to be having a wonderful walk through one of my favorite places, which is Munich. And it was a beautiful day when I filmed it. We really will see it at its very best. And I'll get that one up in the next couple of days as well. So thank you so much for joining me tonight. Thanks for all your support. And I look forward to seeing you all very, very soon. Bye for now, everybody, and thank you.